When they returned to the village, they sat down to dinner at a local ramen restaurant. Gulfin was overwhelmed with emotion because she no longer hoped to find survivors of the village massacre. Lozen didn't think they would survive either. However, they were very lucky. Everything happened too quickly. That day, Garrick had ordered her to leave everything to him and help the others. It was hard for Lozen to obey such an order and leave him alone. But Garrick was firm in his decision, for it was the villagers who were their last hope. If they were gone, they would have no one to protect, and it would all be meaningless. Her job was to save their people. The Bubiz orcs shouldn't fall that day. Lozen was well aware of this as well. After finishing off another demon, she made the decision to obey the order. She immediately rushed towards the shelter, leaving the battle to Garrick and the rest of the warriors. Lozen rushed with all her might. Though she couldn't fight on the front lines, she decided to make every effort to protect the rear. However, upon arrival, a shocking sight awaited her. What she thought was a safe place had been completely destroyed. The sounds of battle could also be clearly heard. It was Dura who was fighting two elite demons. Even though she was powerful, she was having a hard time dealing with them. From her shabby appearance, it was clear that she had been fighting for quite some time. Lozen didn't understand what was going on, or why the bodies of Bob the Builder and Aunt Gyram were lying on the ground. However, she had no time to think at that moment. She had to help Dura, who was already surrounded by demons. Fortunately, she arrived in time and was able to repel the enemy's attack. Anger and confusion overwhelmed Lozen. After finishing off the demon, she asked Dura what was going on here and where the others were. However, all she received in response was silence. There were tears in Dura's eyes. In addition, the remaining demon continued to attack. The real reason why Dura didn't answer was because she didn't know what to say. "They killed everyone," was all she could say to Lozen. Lozen couldn't believe her words. It just couldn't be true. Suddenly, the surviving demon struck her with his sword. Although it was painful, it brought Lozen to her senses. The world was merciless. From the emotions overwhelming her, she lunged at the demon. But suddenly, for some reason, Dura stopped her. She forcefully told her to take Gyram and Bob and run away while she restrained the demons. Lozen again disagreed with this and replied to Dura that she was the one who should leave. However, Dura was determined to fight. Lozen again had no choice but to grit her teeth and rush towards the others. Running up to Auntie Gyram, she tried to bring her to her senses. But Bob the Builder woke up and told her to stop trying because she was already dead. It was incredibly sad to realize that one of your friends was dead. But now, there was a war. She couldn't let the time Dura had won be spent shedding tears. Her first priority was to carry the surviving Bob the Builder to safety. As she left, she saw Dura continue to fight the demons. She really wanted to help her, but she had no choice but to save Bob. At the same time, she saw the small orcs who looked out from behind the rock in fear. They had tears in their eyes because they had witnessed all those murders. Suddenly, there was an explosion. They didn't have time to run away and save themselves. Suddenly, a demon appeared and started chasing them. Dropping Bob, Lozen closed the small one with her. The blow was so strong that she fell to her knees, but the will of the orcs was unbreakable. The wounded Bob grabbed a rock and lunged at the demon. He managed to catch it off guard and landed several blows to the head. After buying some time, they took up running again. Jumping off the rock, they intended to hide in the forest. Lozen shouted to the others to keep up. At the same time, the demons managed to defeat Dura. Not stopping there, they went in pursuit of our heroes. Breaking part of the fence, Lozen opened a way for them to get out. Well, quietly, they didn't manage to leave, because the demons have already managed to catch up with them. Leaving the injured builder, Bob and Muda behind, Lozen rushed to defend their group. At first, she managed to hold back their onslaught and somehow fought back. But the demons fought very meanly, every now and then trying to kill the small orcs. Because of this, Lozen lost her advantage and could not fight at full strength. At one point, one of the demons still managed to slip through to the small ones. It seemed like it was all over. However, in the next instant, the demon's upper body turned into small pieces. The culprit behind this was the Black Knight. He was the one who had saved them. Without much difficulty, he chopped the second demon into pieces as well. At that moment, Lozen was confused and did not know what to do. However, she realized one thing. The Black Knight was not their enemy, at least not now. The Black Knight then ran away without saying anything. Lozen could have returned to the battlefield, but at that moment, she had children, and the wounded with her who needed her help. It was obvious that the demons wanted to exterminate them, so her first priority was to ensure the safety of the survivors. They immediately went to the nearest orc camp where they were given first aid. But it wasn't until some time later that they learned that their Bubiz village had been destroyed. Lozen found it hard to believe all of this. She blamed herself for never being able to help Chief Garrick and the others. In her opinion, she had failed Elder Gurin and everyone else. Gulfin, however, did not see it that way. She did not blame Lozen, for she had done all she could. Besides, if she had returned, they wouldn't have the chance to talk like this now. At the same time, Gul asked his friends how they survived. Though reluctant, they revealed that they hid in a barrel. They admitted that they were helpless and could only watch as the others were killed. Another unpleasant thing was that one of them had wet himself with fear. Dobuk immediately started making excuses, explaining that he thought they had been found and he had gotten very nervous. However, they didn't laugh about it, for they realized that they were still just kids. Kagan wanted to object, however after a moment he agreed, for they really were just a bunch of brats. Needless to say, everyone was in agreement. In the opinion of Bob the Builder, it was up to them whether they would become a bunch of brats in the future or great orcs who could change the course of history. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by an orc who appeared and turned to Lozen and said that the chief Doc Thunder was calling her to him. As soon as Lozen left, Gul and Gulfin said goodbye to the others. They needed time to talk like mother and son. Walking down the street, our hero remarked that Aunt Lozen was truly incredible. Gulfin was in agreement with that. However, she did not understand why he said that. In the mind of Gul, everything was very simple. She was a tough warrior, tough as a mountain, and even the local chief needed. Compared to her, he was just a useless fool. And there was no way a fool like him could avenge his Gramps, Chief Garrick, and the others. He wanted to do so very much, but there was no one he could defeat right now. Gulfin understood his feelings and reminded him of what Uncle Bob had said. Whether he would be a clown next or not was up to him. She advised him to do what he could, and she would be there to support him. Tears appeared in Gul's eyes. He too wanted to be strong and be able to help in times of need. Gulfin replied that the time when his help would be needed would still come, but for now he should let the adults fight their war. At the same time, Lozen arrived at the home of the elders of Butte Village. Bowing her head, she greeted all 5 elders of the village. Chief Doc Thunder immediately said that he had heard that she was a strong warrior capable of even summoning a spirit beast. However, Lozen replied that it wasn't really true, because recently she hadn't even been able to protect her chieftain. Doc Thunder disregarded her words and asked her to join the Butte army. Lozen immediately agreed, for that was exactly what she was about to ask. She was determined to take revenge on the demons. The next day, the Butte village was going about its normal, peaceful life. On one of the streets, Bob the Builder rushed at full speed with a bucket of water. And no, he wasn't going to water the flowers. His mission was to wake up the sleeping Gul. Our hero was not particularly happy about this refreshing gift. Builder Bob was relentless, for he slept until almost noon. Still sleepy, Gul wanted to object, but Bob shouted at him to get his green ass up and follow him. After an awkward moment of silence, our hero realized that he also had to roll the chair. Driving through the streets of Butte Village, where daily life was bustling, Bob the Builder asked Gul when he was going to stop being a useless piece of meat. In addition, his mother was worried that he ate too little. However, our hero only remained silent. On their way, they met one of the Butte elders, Borba. On her question about who was that kid, Bob the Builder replied that it was the son of Gulfin. The elder also immediately noticed that he was very skinny. Taking a basket of meat from the local stall, she handed it to our hero. Thanking Auntie Borba, although not immediately, they went on walking through the village. Bob the Builder couldn't help but notice how huge Butte was. However, he was sure that Gul had not noticed it, as he had been lying in bed all day long. He couldn't understand what was wrong with our hero. He used to be so annoying that even Elder Gurin was losing his mind over it. And there wasn't a rock or tree he didn't climb. Gul was well aware of this himself, yet he didn't know what to do or where to start. Bob knew how he felt, for together they had lost the family they had known since birth. However, life did not end there. No matter what village they were born in or where they were, all orcs were their family. From that fateful day, every survivor of the Bubiz village began to train. They all wanted only one thing, to gain strength and take revenge on the insidious demons. Even Bob the Builder showed his resilience and stood up from his chair. In his opinion, a warrior's determination was not in constant self-pity, but in the ability to do what needed to be done. That was what it meant to be a true hero. The path they were about to travel was sure to be full of dangers. They would surely encounter familiar opponents. But even the demons that attacked their village had to answer to their king, and they would need everyone to stand up to his power. Bob the Builder believed that Gul had potential, but first he had to unlock it. He had only 2 choices: continue to drown in despair or gather his will in his fist and become a true orc. In that moment, Gul remembered the words his friends and mother had told him. He had to keep moving forward no matter what. Besides, his friends had already decided everything for themselves and were training hard. He couldn't lag behind them, so he decided to give it his best effort as well. While Bob the Builder continued to tell him about the meaning of life, our hero asked him why he had to be wheeled on a chair if he could already walk. But for such impertinence, he immediately got a slap on the forehead, and that was his baptism of fire. Now everything was in his hands. but he didn't know that Gul had made his decision a moment ago. Our hero had successfully transformed from a dull piece of meat into a formerly cheerful orc, who now also had a goal. That was the real Gul. Bob slumped back in his chair. These few minutes had been all he could do for now. Gul must move on. He would have many battles to fight, and to come out of them as a winner, he would not only have to be strong, but also have loyal friends. There was a training session going on in the training ground. Every now and then, the hard-working orcs could be heard shouting. The smaller ones were being tested by the local wrestling instructor. Dobuk was the first to strike. His punch was powerful, but it was only enough to bend a pole. In the teacher's opinion, it wasn't a bad result. Gul, on the other hand, continued his non-contact fight with his pole. Kagan struck next. His punch was much stronger than Dobuk's. It was even enough to break the pole. Needless to say, even the teacher was impressed. Next was Mutu. From his movements, the teacher immediately realized that he was in good shape, and he wasn't wrong. With one precise strike, he easily sliced the pole in half. It was indeed the best result. Even the teacher praised him. Gul, on the other hand, finally decided to move into action and prepared to strike. With a furious orc shout, his fist headed towards the pillar. However, his punch was only able to make the pillar shake slightly. That was all it did. Gul stared at his fist in bewilderment while his friends began to laugh. None of them had expected such a bad result, which was the reason for the mockery. The other orcs on the training ground turned their attention to the situation. Some of them were surprised, and some of them were watching with interest. At the same time, Mutu approached Gul. He was the only one of the three who didn't mock him. He advised Gul not to expect to succeed the first time. Even in Bubas, he used to skip training to play and climb mountains. Gul said nothing, and continued to stare sadly at the ground. The gathered orcs watched the youngsters with interest, but the mocking of Gul did not end there. His friends continued to mock his blow, which they thought was even weaker than that of a fly. At first our hero tried to ignore it, but it was the limit of his patience. The next moment he shouted irritably at them, asking when they would stop talking. His shout made the departing Butte chief freeze in place. The reason for this was that in his shout he felt a very ominous feeling for a split second. After Gul's shout, Dobuk and Kagan quieted down and apologized. However, as it turned out a moment later, they weren't really sorry and continued laughing. Gul, who had fallen for their game for a moment, was now really angry. His leg began to turn red, and after a moment he lunged at his offenders with a fierce shout. His blow would have hit Dobuk and Kagan, but the chieftain, who had arrived in time, blocked his blow. The very next moment there was an explosion, and all the small ones were thrown into the air by the blast wave. Mutu, who had only suffered from the sheer force of the blast, began to try to understand what had happened. The other orcs on the training ground were also shocked. Despite the sheer force of the impact, the leader didn't have a scratch on him. He was only interested in one question: what kind of power Gul possessed. However, at that moment, Gul couldn't answer that question, for he himself didn't understand what had happened. Turning his gaze to his leg, he saw that it was red. He again had the same feeling as when he fought the Goblin King, and also when his grandfather was killed and he fought a demon. Rushing over to the little guys, Lozen shouted to call for the healers. They got hit pretty hard. Dobuk even passed out. Luckily, the rest of them were fine, with only a few scrapes and scratches. Lozen immediately asked Gul in a furious voice what he had done. However, our hero himself did not understand how it happened. He regretted what he had done, but there was nothing he could do about it. Looking for help, he turned his gaze to the chief. However, he was still waiting for his answer. There was silence on the training ground. Everyone present only looked at Gul and the chief. Gul apologized and said that he had no intention of hurting his friends. All he felt at that moment was that he was angry with himself. The chief wasn't going to listen to his excuse and ordered him to hit him again. Gul was puzzled by his request, but the chief was not kidding and shouted for him to hit him again. Our hero began to strike furiously, but no matter how many times he struck, the chief continued to stand as if he were a rock. He was disappointed that this was all that an orc who had lost his home could do. He needed Gul to show what he was capable of. Hitting our hero with his hand, he sent him flying without much difficulty. After rolling quite a distance, Gul eventually hit his head on the fence and fell to the ground. He was distressed, and the wound on his head hurt. He was angry with himself. Anger was beginning to rage within him. He wanted to prove to himself, to the chief, and to everyone that he was not useless and weak. It was at such moments that the demon appeared in his mind. He knew perfectly well that it was in moments of rage and anger that it was easiest to manipulate the mind. He began to suggest that the chief's behavior was unacceptable and that he should have killed him for it. His tactics worked again. Gul did not resist and trusted him. In the very next instant, his skin turned red and he let out a furious scream. Everyone present could feel the tension building in the air. The chief was shocked by Gul's sudden transformation and his increased strength. Looking at Gul, who looked more like an enraged beast, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster Garrick and Gurin had created. The tension was rising. Ghoul was becoming more and more insane, like an uncontrollable monster. Already after a moment, it rushed towards the leader at lightning speed. The chief was stunned by the tremendous speed. Taking the blow, he blocked Ghoul's attack. The blow was incredibly powerful, as even a strong warrior like him was thrown back several meters. However, that was all Ghoul could do. The leader was able to stay on his feet. He hadn't fully believed what the dark elf had told him about Ghoul, but now he was convinced of it with his own eyes. However, the spectacle had made a huge impression on the others present. From his red skin and the markings on his body, they realized that he was a blood orc. This news was shocking. Ghoul, on the other hand, was beginning to come to his senses. He didn't immediately understand what the others were talking about and why they were calling him a blood orc. However, after looking at his hands, he realized that it had happened to him again. He had lost control of himself again. He wanted to figure out what had happened to him, but suddenly he was visited by an unknown feeling that made his whole body freeze. He could feel the golden dragon awakening in his body, and he knew that the only one who had ever possessed it was his Gramps Gurren. His mind immediately flashed back to the memories of how he had given him some of his power and asked the dragon to watch over him. The demon inside Ghoul also sensed the trouble perfectly. However, there was nothing he could do about the fact that his will was being suppressed. He tried to resist, but this force was stronger. Chains covered in golden light began to bind him. At the end of the brief confrontation, he was completely restrained, unable to do anything. He had lost, and his majestic throne began to crumble. The demon didn't understand, or rather didn't want to accept his defeat. He knew his opponent well, which made him even more furious. Grutom, he was someone who shouldn't have been there. However, despite all his rage, the demon was powerless. When he was temporarily sealed, Ghoul began to return to his previous state. The others noticed this as well, and so they came closer. They had many questions, and one of them was what was even going on. Ran and Layla were also watching what was happening. From Ran's reaction, Layla realized that he was aware of the situation from the beginning. It was true, and besides, he was the one who had warned Chief Dak. At the same time, there was silence between Ghoul and the chief. Dak was the first to speak. He told Ghoul that only by drinking demon blood could one get such power. And coincidentally, only Gurren had a bottle of it. It was a gift from one of their fallen brothers during the time of the war with the demons. However, the most amazing part of the story was that Ghoul drank it and remained alive. Chief Dak burst into laughter. Ghoul still didn't really understand what was going on. The only thing he remembered was accidentally drinking some crap a couple years ago. However, his grandfather had said then that he would be fine. Dak also found it hard to believe that the legend of the Blood Orc was true. He began to ask Ghoul if he realized the power he had gained. It all started over 200 years ago when the Blue Demons decided to take over the land. Along the way, they enslaved all peoples they deemed weaker than their kind. One group of demons paid particular attention to raiding orc villages. And it wasn't because they needed labor for their ever-growing kingdom. The real reason was because they needed test subjects. Back then, the demons were experimenting on creating a monstrous, expendable army that they planned to bring chaos to all the other kingdoms. The experiments had only one goal, to find a blood orc. It was from this that a huge portion of the orc population perished. Despite the vast amount of blood spilled, the demons never succeeded. However, Ghoul succeeded. He became a blood orc. He was the weapon that the demons had always desired. Everyone present listened to the chief with bated breath. They slowly began to realize how much value Ghoul had. However, with great power comes great responsibility. Realizing this, Chief Dak asked our hero if he wanted to master this power and become a true warrior. Ghoul did not hesitate to answer that he did. Dak himself would have liked to teach him, but replied that he had no place in the village. Ghoul did not know why the chief had refused him, and so he began to assure him that he would be able to do it, and that he could even withstand any training. But the reason why Chief Dak had refused him was something else entirely. He was a blood orc, which meant that one wrong move and he could hurt someone. The only way out in this situation was to find a master. He was the only one who could handle this. In Dak's opinion, Jareth Fullbringer was the perfect candidate for this. He was also known as Master of Ki. He had enough strength and experience to help Ghoul. No one knew exactly where he was, however the elves would have to help him with this. Ran and Layla gladly agreed to this mission, for Layla had once been his student as well. Hearing this, Ghoul stared at Layla with admiration. She was indeed strong, and he really wanted to become the same. Chief Dak told our hero that he shouldn't relax, for he had a long and difficult journey ahead of him. His primary goal was to learn to control his strength and become a true warrior. At the same time, in Ghoul's mind, the demon was talking to Grutom. The demon felt his freedom was only a matter of time. He was fueled by the darkness of this child. All he had to do was wait for the right opportunity. Later that evening, Ghoul and his mom enjoyed a beautiful view of Pute village. But that wasn't the only reason they were here. Gulfin also wanted to talk to Ghoul before he left. She asked if he was really sure about his decision to leave the nest. However, in Gul's opinion, she had left him in it a long time ago. Gulfin couldn't deny it, but in her defense she said that she had to fulfill her role, to help restore peace and harmony to their lands. Hearing this, Gul said with hatred in his voice that it was really time for them to kill all the demons. Those demons should have regretted attacking boobies and for allowing their children to be born into this world. Gulfin didn't really like the attitude with which Gul was speaking, but he continued. He was sure that with the power that Chief Dak had told him about, he could make the demons suffer 10 times more than the orcs suffered. Suddenly, Gulfin slapped him. Gul stared at his mother in bewilderment, trying to understand what had happened. Gulfin was furious. She began to ask what kind of nonsense he was talking about and if he really wanted to be like them. And did he really want to kill innocent people like them? Gul asked what she thought he should do then. Without thinking long, Gulfin slapped Gul again. She didn't understand what was going on with him and why he had become so cranky lately, even hurting a friend for teasing him a little. The orcs had only entered the war to protect future generations and to be able to live without fear for their lives. She in no way wanted him to become a mindless killer. And if he was going to take revenge, he should take it to the right person, and to the one who really deserved it. But he should also remember that they fight first to protect. Gul didn't argue and agreed with her, but as it turned out, Gulfin had something for him. By late afternoon they arrived at her forge. Entering inside, our hero shrieked with delight. There was a large number of all sorts of weapons and armor hanging everywhere. All of this was the result of her years of working with the many types of ores that were mined in Butte, all to find the right material to create the perfect sword. Gul was really excited about how cool his mom was. Even her failed attempts Gul rated as very cool. However, despite how cool they looked, that wasn't their real value. As they approached the huge hammer, Gulfin stopped. Pressing down on a hidden plate, she opened a hidden drawer that held a chest. Gulfin proudly showed him the dagger, however Gul was not too thrilled. In his opinion, she had a bunch of weapons that were bigger and better. But his mother persisted. She believed that for now, he could do more if he used the dagger. She also added that if he wanted a bigger weapon, he would have to earn it. But this small dagger was no ordinary dagger either. It was made of the strongest local metal alloy, Huguerin steel. Its hilt was made from the scales of a black dragon. It was one of her finest creations. Plus, she had made it especially for him. At her words, Gul was delighted. He even asked if she was sure she wanted to give such a valuable dagger to him. Nodding affirmatively, his mother replied with a soft smile that it was his. Receiving his gift, our hero thanked his mom. She, in turn, said he should have given the dagger a name. Taking the dagger out and twirling it in his hands, Gul began to think about what to name it. After some time of thinking, he was finally able to come up with a suitable one. And there was a name for this great sword, Tony Tony. The moment he said those words, purple smoke appeared from the dagger. However, just a moment later, it completely dissipated, leaving Gul puzzled. After a while, Layla entered the smithy. Gulfin immediately noticed that she looked cool. Blushing, she thanked her and said that it was because of the tailor who was enthusiastic. Gul also noticed how she had changed and was about to say how hot she was, but he was stopped by Gulfin's stern look. He was sure that if he had said the word fully, she would have beaten his ass. Luckily, Gul realized this and corrected his position in time to say that she looked happy. Gulfin asked Layla where Ran was, and she said that he had decided to go alone because he thought he was already in debt. At the same time, Ran was standing on a mountain, at the foot of which there were many large spiders. They were the ones that were the target of his mission today. In a couple of moments, he was able to deal with several of them at once, their purple blood and body parts scattered in all directions. But it wasn't killing them that was his goal. He wanted the silk they were weaving. Once he was done with the spiders, he began to collect the silk. The next morning began beautifully as always in Butte. Orcs were already swarming outside the village's atelier from the morning. Butte's tailor Araba was also excited about the new day. She began to remember how much she had enjoyed working on the dark elf's clothes. She stretched sweetly and yawned. However, her breathing was by no means as good as the morning. The flowers in Ran came within striking distance of it, wilted instantly. In Ran's estimation, the stench from her mouth could kill anyone, and could even be a strategic weapon in the war against demons. Apologizing for his dirty appearance, he said he had gotten her the material she needed. Araba was happy to hear this, but did not realize where the promised materials were. Ran immediately opened a dimensional storage, which surprised the tailor, who had already forgotten that dark elves could do that. Already in the next moment, she was flooded with materials. There were so many materials that she found herself buried alive under them. Araba was really surprised that Ran was able to bring everything she needed. When Ran asked if it would be enough, she confidently replied that it would be more than enough. He had brought top-grade materials, so there was nothing to worry about. Araba's enthusiasm was again sky-high. She promised Ran that in 2 days, everything would be ready. 2 days later, Gul started packing for the journey. He put on new clothes and also took his dagger. Finally, he was fully ready to conquer the world. At the same time, his mother was talking to Elder Borba. She informed her that she intended to return to the Elf Kingdom in a couple of days. Ghoul arrived and greeted Elder Borba in his cheerful manner. She knew that he was going on a trip and asked if he was ready to build up his biceps and meat. However, to their surprise, Ghoul's mood immediately disappeared. The reason was that he missed his backpack Guilliman. He felt incomplete without him and didn't understand how he could start an adventure without his best buddy. In that moment, he truly realized and understood the cruelty of life. Not wanting to listen to him whine anymore, Gulfin threw her bag at him. However, in Ghoul's opinion, it was lame and unwearable. In Gulfin's opinion, the most important thing was practicality, because adventures were not that easy. Borba, who was watching the situation, laughed. At the same time, Ran arrived at the smithy and told Ghoul that he wanted to give him a present. Ghoul didn't mind at all. Dropping his bag, he immediately went to him. The bag that Ran had brought with him looked really impressive. Unzipping it, he pulled out a cool backpack that had been made by Araba. Ghoul's eyes immediately lit up with happiness at the sight of it. Ran told him that Araba had shown impressive skills creating this backpack. It was made from moonspider silk, purified from corruption, as well as other quality materials. It was the least he could do since he had left Guilliman behind in their country. Ran really hoped he liked it. Ghoul's actions were better than any words. Rushing over to the backpack, he hugged his new friend tightly. It was the backpack he had always dreamed of. He immediately asked Ran what to call it. He replied that he had dared to give it the name Selamun. Even though Ghoul couldn't pronounce the word the first time, he still thought it was the right word. Thanking Ran once again, our hero said that he finally felt complete again. Now that Ghoul was fully ready to go on his journey, it was time to give him Bute's blessing for his journey. Here in Bute, they were all family, and so if any of them were traveling, they would support him in any way they could. And so if he asked, their brothers and sisters would provide him with whatever he needed. To be sure, Ghoul innocently asked if he could really ask for anything. Elder Borba replied that naturally, he just needed to say that he was from her. Hearing this, Ghoul smiled. However, very few people knew that behind that innocent smile was something more sinister. Gulfin was well aware of Ghoul's dark side, so she told the elder that she shouldn't throw her words around. Ghoul became a demon, even more terrifying than the one inside him. At the same time, in the Bute elder's house, there was a meeting. According to one of the elders, they had enough warriors. However, Chief Dak disagreed, for in war there are never enough warriors. They could not afford to lose any advantage. Another elder reported that he had already sent word to the allies. This was great news, for with Antari's connections, they would be able to find out where the demons had hidden their bases on the Waragu continent. The demons had indeed kept quiet for the time being, but they still managed to strike at the most painful place. Now, it was no longer just an orc battle, for it was clear that the demons were preparing something. Another elder asked if Gulfin's son was really a blood orc. Thinking back on it, Dak remembered Gurren. The fact that the boy drank the demon's blood and survived could be a key deciding factor in this war. Miles away from Bute, Spade came to visit a captured demon. He asked, why did the Greed move its army? The demon was in no hurry to answer, so Spade quickly let him know that he wasn't going to joke. The adventurer was sure that the demon did not want to be stuck here in the dungeon forever, and if he wanted to get out, he'd better start answering questions right now. News had recently reached the adventurer that Beastmaster Gurren had been killed, and Spade wanted to know why it was done. Slick heard the news and laughed, amused by the fact that the destruction must have been a blast. But he couldn't laugh for long. Spade quickly stepped on his wounded leg and reminded him of his predicament. There was something in all this that didn't fit, in Spade's opinion. He didn't believe that the Greed demon army could kill the Beastmaster alone. Well, the demon admitted that it was more than just greed in the air. It was all punishment. Those orc slaves got what they deserved. From his words, Spade concluded that greed wasn't the only thing involved. He had learned what he wanted and was about to leave the prison room when Slick called out to him and said that people better be careful. Demons are envious and are wrathful as well. Those orcs were just the beginning. Now let's go back to Ghoul, who with his new backpack was running around the streets of Bute looking for his gang. He found them pretty quickly. These bums were not practicing now and were probably up to something nasty. But Ghoul had a more important task for them. He needed help gathering goods for the journey. With such a task, the bros were always willing to help. There was only one small problem that no one seemed to care about except Mutu. He didn't understand how they could get the goods if they didn't have money or things to trade. It felt like the other idiots hadn't even thought of that. But Ghoul actually had a plan. Elder Borba had told him that by bringing up her name, he could get anything he wanted from the people of Bute. Mutu saw holes in Ghoul's plan even here. What if no one believed him? Did he even have the signature of an elder? Ghoul unfortunately wasn't known for that kind of savvy and didn't think that far ahead. But he had clearly heard that Elder Borba had said exactly that. Of course, that wasn't enough to make it seem plausible. Kagan grudgingly stated that Gul should go and ask Grandma Borba for a signature so they wouldn't look bad, but Gul replied that they didn't have that much time. He had to go any minute. If they delayed, he wouldn't get much goods, which he was not happy about. Kagan was already starting to feel trouble approaching his ass. But then Dobuk's sly laugh was heard. He was the evil genius of their gang for a reason. He came up with the brilliant idea of making the sign himself. Of course, everyone liked the idea. So Mutu started writing as hard as he could. It was much harder than hitting a trunk. The poor guy was struggling so hard that sweat ran down his face. He couldn't remember how to write R, but Gul and the others couldn't help him because they didn't even know. Instead, they just advised him to write faster at least something. Mutu agreed that speed was more important than quality and quickly scribbled a signature. It was a masterpiece, their path to a rich life. So with a cheerful song, they went to ravage the local market. The Boobiz boys could afford anything, meat for every taste, and as much as they wanted. The surprised merchants didn't know how to react. When a piece of paper labeled Booba was shoved in their faces instead of money or goods, the Boobiz gang didn't stop at meat. They went on to raid the stalls of utensils, sweets, vegetables, fruits, and everything else. It went on like this until the backpack swelled to the max and nothing else could be stuffed in it. All thanks to Borba and her rash words. However, the traders began to suspect something wrong and gathered to discuss whether they had met a group of children who grabbed all the goods and then did not pay for them. Yes, they all had, and not a single stall had survived. Kids said Elder Borba vouched for them, and they even had a signed paper with her name on it. Of course, that didn't help. One merchant they took actually half of the store's goods from. Meanwhile, the little brats were enjoying the loot. They ate and drank and couldn't get enough of how good it was. There were plenty of goods to go around. And most importantly, they had gotten it all for free. Gul couldn't agree more, but he reminded them that they wouldn't have gotten it all if Mutu hadn't signed a piece of paper for them instead of Elder Borba. That signature simply worked wonders. Mutu smugly replied that if there's something to be done, it shall be done. The boys were just praising Mutu as their guy, and it would have been fine if they did it quieter and away from the stalls. Waving a fake signature in front of the noses of the robed merchants was not the smartest idea. Immediately, the little rascals began to sense that something was wrong. The goosebumps on their skin made it clear they were in trouble. But just what kind of trouble? What could possibly go wrong? Well, the enraged merchants were ready to explain it all to them clearly. Not even their clothes could withstand their rage. There was only one thing left for the gang to do, and Mutu hit the mark. Run. So the chase was on, and the Boobiz gang had to run as fast as they could if they wanted to live. The enraged merchants were determined to punish the little rascals. Now the asses of the little assholes belonged to the merchants, and they were not going to let them go anywhere. Of course, the little bros didn't agree with that and didn't want to die at all, so they hit the gas with all their might. The poor fellows were worried about their lives. Only Gul was having fun, and thanks to his fast legs, he wasn't worried about his green ass at all. At the same time, the Orc Elders, together with the Dark Elves, were discussing the details of the upcoming journey to Master of Kai. They were counting on Gul as a weapon that could change the outcome of the future war with the demons. But what was their surprise when a stomping sound came from the direction of the village? It was as if an entire army was advancing. When they looked around, they saw Gul and his bros running away from the angry merchants. Elder Borba was the most surprised. She couldn't understand what was going on and why the usually friendly Butte orcs had suddenly become so aggressive and ready to tear these little orcs apart here and now. The little assholes immediately began to press the pity of the elder and ask for her help and protection from these aunts and uncles who want to kill them. At the same time, of course, they didn't say why. Mutu, feeling more confident under the protection, said that they had simply done what Elder Borba had told Gul. She didn't remember what she had told him, so she asked what she might have said. The patience of the robed merchants began to run out, and they rushed forward to punish the little brats. Now even Chief Dak had to restrain them. Suddenly the scuffle was interrupted by a shout from Gul, who asked all the Butte orcs to listen to him. Everyone froze in surprise and looked at him. Gul, on the other hand, was glowing with self-confidence. He solemnly introduced himself to everyone as Braba Gul, son of Gulfin. He thanked everyone for letting them stay in Butte. Next he told everyone again the sad story of their village, and shared that when their village Boobiz was destroyed by demons, he thought they had lost everything, because it was the only warm place he knew. But everything changed when he came to Butte, and here he found his new home. All thanks to his new uncles and aunts who treated them like family. And now Gul announced to everyone that he was going on a new journey to become a strong warrior and a true orc. Even Gul's friends wept at this inspirational speech and were proud to have such a friend. But Gul didn't stop there and declared that he wouldn't let anyone else trample on the orcs, and he would never give up or fall without a fight. The orcs were encouraged by such a speech and immediately forgot all their past offenses. Now, they were glorifying Gul. Gul was sure that now these demons will never be able to humiliate the orcs again. Never. And all the orcs agreed with him. Huga Baruga, blood and honor, orcs forever. In the midst of all this speech, Gul turned his attention to his mother at the end, and told her that he couldn't promise her anything, but he will try to be a good warrior who won't let her down. After such a masterful escape from the angry crowd, cheeky bastard Gul went down to his new Gulamon. Gulfin came up to him and asked him not to upset the master, for she had heard that he was not easy to please. But Gul reassured her, confident that everyone liked him. And so once again, Gul was on his way, along with Ran and Layla. But this time it was a different Gul, determined and responsible to fulfill his mission, not to have fun. Looking back, he remembered the friendly Boobiz orcs who had seen him off not long ago. They were gone now, but instead were the Bute orcs. Looking up, he saw images of a happy Garrick, Grandpa Gorin, and Aunt Jiram wishing him a happy journey. Such a thing made him unable to hold back his tears. Catching up with his two companions, Gul was sure that this time things would be different and he would be useful and valuable. Now he would never let anyone down again. At the same time, not far away in the forest, the familiar foxes were sniffing around in search of prey. Unfortunately, they had recently eaten all their stuff, wheat new truff, and now they were empty-handed. It was not surprising, though, because they had a guest. Now they had to find something valuable to sell, or their boss wouldn't be happy if they showed up empty-handed. They hoped that little orc was feeling better, otherwise they'd just eat up all that spices for nothing. Suddenly they froze in surprise. They had come to the clearing where some dark elf had organized a genocide of spiders last night. This was the first time they had seen something like this, and could only imagine what kind of madman had gone crazy in this forest. But more importantly, that madman didn't even collect all the valuable stuff. There were corrupted moonlight spiders. And that meant uncorrupted shining money for them. It didn't take long for word of the Beastmaster's demise to spread across the land. Numerous realms were taken aback. One such example is the Antares Kingdom, renowned for its status as neutral territory. The kingdom is home to a diverse population. Many races live here together. Humans, elves, dwarves, orcs, even demons are said to be welcome. His Majesty King Ren Turgar is the monarch of this stunning nation, which he rules with the determination to uphold his ancestors' legacy. And now guests were arriving at the gates of his palace one by one. Aden Horatio, guildmaster of Golthunder Guild, had arrived early and was greeting Madame Roselle, who had finally arrived. He thought she wouldn't make it, but she did. Roselle Dunn, guildmaster of the Chatty Boars Guild, was still pleased to be greeted by such a gentleman knight, despite his remarks. Aden Horatio was sure she wouldn't make it because he had heard that she had been very busy lately. Roselle Dunn confirmed that she had indeed been very busy, but the information she had received was very valuable, and she was going to reveal it later during the meeting. Aden Horatio was looking forward to it. Olga of Mishza, guildmaster of Fighting Against the Nefarious Guild, was watching them. When the others approached her, she asked if they were the only ones here. "Where's the dragon guy?" "Oh, you didn't have to worry about him. He was already on his way riding Tempest." Guildmaster France was already very close. In the same town, two familiar figures were sitting on the roof of a house. They had just sold the supplies they had gathered in the forest and were just glowing with happiness. It was the first time they had made so much money. The skinny, clearly not bandit couldn't wait to get the bag of gold in his hands. He wanted to feel its weight. But Fatty left him no chance, justifying his decision by the fact that his friend was prone to losing valuable things. What if that gold got lost somewhere in their pockets? Skinny didn't give up and came up with a new idea. He was sure they couldn't give it all to their boss. There's quite a lot of gold here, and the boss would never know if they kept some for themselves. Fatty told him, "You know what? You're absolutely right. Bandits never change." And they laughed heartily at their cunning, not even noticing the dragon approaching on the horizon. It flew past them with such speed that it knocked the bag of gold out of their hands and almost threw them off. They were horrified when they realized the money was gone. It was gone. It turned out Fatty's hands were even less reliable than the skinny fox's. So their money was blown away, and all they could do was scream in despair. Which I must say, they did very well. Meanwhile, Guildmaster France had successfully landed in the backyard of the castle. He petted his faithful dragon and promised that he would be back soon. Now he had to hurry. His Majesty was already waiting. It was gone. It turned out Fatty's hands were even less reliable than the skinny fox's. So their money was blown away, and all they could do was scream in despair. At last, everyone gathered around the table, and the meeting began. But it didn't start as calmly as everyone would have liked. Olga was simply furious because she thought it was unacceptable that the Beastmaster was dead. The demons had crossed the line and reached the point of no return. France agreed with her, while Roselle asked her esteemed colleagues to calm down, assuring them that they should not make hasty decisions. The chief of the guards urged everyone to behave appropriately in the presence of the king, but the king assured him that everything was fine. The king understood their indignation, for old Gurin was a symbol of peace to everyone. Furthermore, Rentergar himself was deeply concerned about the violation of the non-aggression pact that had been made between their alliance and the Tenebrous. Upon hearing this title, Olga hummed loudly and interrupted the king. Apologizing, she stated that they didn't deserve the name. They are demons. They have long accepted the title and acted accordingly. This behavior was beginning to get on the nerves of the chief of guards, and he once again reminded Miss Olga that she was speaking to His Majesty. Adan realized that he had to relieve this tension. He told everyone that Madame Roselle had vital information to share, if she didn't mind. Then Roselle stood up and said that, as everyone knows, she has the ability to acquire crucial information, and her hogs have obtained the map detailing the locations of the demons' hidden bases, which are presently dispersed around the nation. Back to Gul and his journey. Gul kept begging Rand to teach him dagger skills. Now that his mother had given him a dagger, he couldn't wait to learn how to use it. Rand took one look at it and realized what a treasure it was. Looking at it closer, he was sure that any man would kill to have such a dagger. However, Gul didn't see anything special about it. He was still sure that size was the most important thing. Rand couldn't agree with such nonsense and couldn't believe that Gul was incapable of appreciating all this beauty. Gul wasn't interested in such lofty matters as beauty and aesthetics. He just needed to know whether Rand would teach him or not. Reluctantly, Rand agreed. He thought that food was the clearest example for Gul, so he asked if he could see the fruit on the tree. Gul had to watch Rand use his dagger to get the fruit without any problems. One precise movement, and the fruit was sliced off. It fell right into Rand's hands, and Gul was just thrilled at how cool it was. Well, it was his turn to try it. Gul took a proper swing and launched the dagger at the tree with all his might. It didn't even come close to hitting the fruit. That, of course, pissed him off, so he started throwing rocks at the tree to get the stuck dagger off. Of course he failed, which made him even more furious. He thought he'd never get better at it and ran to pull the dagger out. Layla reassured him that it was okay, he just needed more practice. She advised Rand that if he was going to teach Gul, he should be shown proper basics first, though Rand was sure that was exactly what he was doing. While Rand was trying to tell Gul the basics, about weapons and how to use them, Gul wasn't listening and was fully immersed in the process of pulling the dagger from the tree. The dagger stubbornly resisted all his attempts. Finally, he gave up and kicked the tree with all his might, covering everyone in with a mountain of fruits. Even this result pleased him, and his mood was immediately improved. Gul was an orc for a reason. Where there was strength, there was no need for intelligence. He still managed to pick the fruit, right? Now let's go back to the Council of Guild Leaders and the king to find out what information Madame Roselle had managed to get. The other participants of the meeting were also eager to find it out. But the king was interested not only in the information itself, but also how it was obtained. Roselle said that the information was obtained thanks to a map found at one of the hidden demon bases, where one dark elf had broken in. While the demons were chasing him, one of Roselle's men was able to take advantage of the confusion and chaos to sneak in and steal a large map from there, which was delivered to this meeting as well. The map was marked with red markers to indicate hidden demon bases, a few of which were labeled by greed demons. The rest her guild had discovered on their own. But the scouting wasn't over yet, and there might actually be even more bases. Apparently the demons are planning to place military garrisons on these bases. Hearing this, Rebus Amir Falsur, guildmaster of the Maker's Hand Guild, asked if this meant that the demons were planning to invade these lands again. Despite the clear evidence, Aiden didn't believe they would have the strength to do so. He was sure that as long as their dragon god Kondarik was locked away in the depths of Shadow Prison, they would not be able to regain their past power. But Roselle reminded him that that hadn't stopped them from succeeding in killing one of the celebrated heroes of the last war. And as much as she hated to say it, the demons' actions definitely constitute an act of defiance against peace accord. Olga had no doubt that the demons were clearly declaring war right to their faces. France too was not silent and added that he had already lost 2 of his adventurers due to the demon scouts. It so happened that a nearby army was marching on its way through dense rock forest. The king finished his sentence for him and added that the army was marching directly to the orc village of Bubiz, where the beastmaster Gurin lived. Ren already knew all the details thanks to the 2 old men who had told him all the gruesome details of what had happened. Even so, France had something to add. His subordinates had managed to extract additional information from one of the demon scouts. Some found it hard to believe that they had managed to capture the demon alive. But it was the truth. Greed, wrath, and envy. Those were the Tenebrew clans who attacked the orc village. The king was surprised to hear that 3 clans were involved, and in a rage he declared that this is an upfront assault. He was saddened to realize that the existence of the Tenebrew peoples in his kingdom was like this. His people were just beginning to get used to the presence of demons on the streets. At a time when the wounds from the Great War were just beginning to heal, a new war was about to begin. His musings were interrupted by France, who said that he might have something that would help His Majesty decide what to do next. One of his subordinate adventurers, Spade, has been exchanging information with the captain of the Tenebrous Sloth clan, and he learned that there has been some confusion and ambiguity prevailing inside their kingdom between the monarchy and its people, especially the thirst for power of an individual named Shuya Un. So, the demon clans are divided and feuding amongst themselves and their king. However, this information sounded too suspicious, and Roselle assumed that this could be a ploy intending to lead them into a trap. In any case, the king was sure that they should be prepared for anything, and the worst too. Just now the news came from the elves. They were ready to come to help at any moment when circumstances demanded it. The exact same news came from the orcs. Then the king decided it was time to act first. He ordered to inform the entire alliance to gather troops to destroy the hidden demon bases. Perhaps this would be a challenge for everyone, and King Ren didn't want to be the kind of king who thoughtlessly sends his men to war, but no act of dishonor will go unpunished. The demons simply left them no other choice. Furthermore, the king reminded everyone that any unnecessary aggression towards Tenebrous people who are currently residing in this kingdom shall not be condoned. They might be going to war, but they are not demons. They might be going to war, but they are not demons. And they don't murder innocent people. But until the matter is settled, all requests for demons to leave or enter the kingdom will be denied. In the meantime, the king was going to establish communication with Demon's monarch and ascertain the underlying cause of the situation. A little while later in the wild kitchen, news began to reach the chief and he received a letter from Pute. But he was, as usual, too busy to read it. He had to check on the evening service. It was not for nothing that it was the wild garlic himself, Godin Ramsay. In his classic fashion, he went to inspect his cooks who, in his opinion, were not handling anything and were just garbage. His rage was, as usual, at the highest level, and no one escaped humiliation. Finally calming down a bit after the inspection, he sat down to read the letter. Literally after a few lines read, he became enraged again. Godin Ramsay was not going to tolerate these insolent demons and was ready to chop them into tiny pieces. He was sorry that the demons were smart enough to send an army after his old friend Gurren. Well, he was ready to act again. It was too early for him to retire. Along with the letter came a scroll. Godin Ramsay was even more shocked when he learned about the Blood Orc. While the king and the guild leaders were deciding the fate of the continent, Gul had something equally interesting to do. He was yelling at the poor chameleon who was getting tired of it. Gul didn't stop until he received a crisp slap. The bored chameleon was not as harmless as it seemed at first glance. This infuriated Gul. He was about to show this brat who was who here. But Rand stopped him. He asked him to calm down and remember what he had told him last time about the forest creatures. Rand believed that this poor creature could be the spirit guardian of the forest, so Gul should stop killing everything that got in their way. Expectedly, of course, Gul didn't listen to him, and in a few hours the chameleon pieces were already frying appetizingly in a frying pan. They set up their camp on the shore of the forest lake, and all but Rand were enjoying the beautiful evening. Even Layla was quite pleased with Gul's cooking skills and couldn't resist trying a little. She also remarked that Gul was pretty good with his hands. Such a remark surprised Rand, who couldn't help but ask what she meant by that. In fact, Gul was just showing a master class in dicing meat and more. Even Godin Ramsay would have been pleased with such an advanced technique. That was not the case with Rand, who was simply jaw-dropped at the misuse of a masterpiece dagger. Gul, on the other hand, was quite pleased with his work and even praised Tony for his fantastic work. Finally, Rand couldn't take it anymore and shouted in indignation that he had just turned an exceptional dagger made by the legendary blacksmith into an ordinary meat chopper. Although what did he expect from Gul? To calm down a bit, Rand started eating his elven bread. Layla had warned him to be careful, for nymphs are rampant around this forest. Of course, Rand knew what they were, which could not be said for Gul, who did not listen to them and went to fetch water with a bucket. Layla went on to tell Rand that nymphs do not shy away from exploring your ribald desires. And if you can't contain yourself, you risk being dragged into the darkness of the deep. Unfortunately, Gul didn't hear all this and fell completely under the nymphs' charms. Despite their danger, Layla believed that nymphs existed in the forest for the reason of protecting the forest from people who could potentially harm it. And that was why it was important for everyone to remain vigilant. As soon as she stopped talking, a distinctive blop sound was heard behind them. That's when they noticed Gul's absence. Rand already had a sense of déjà vu. Here we go again. Where could that bald orc be? Rand was getting angry. He had already seen this coming. So he had thoughtfully tied an invisible string of mana to the orc, and now, when he activated it, he could be found. But what he didn't expect was to be pulled into the water with incredible force and speed. Layla immediately rushed after him. Rand could do nothing and was being dragged to the bottom. Luckily, Layla was already rushing to his aid. She caught Rand near the bottom and threw him to the surface with such force that he flew out of the water, right along with Gul. Of course, the nymph didn't like her prey being taken, but Layla was already on the shore to protect her unlucky friends. She bravely stood right in front of the enraged mistress of the forest lake. Gul began to come to his senses and wondered where the cutie had gone. Layla was glowing in front of him, and he still couldn't figure out if this was all really happening or if he was just dreaming. It was a battle of attitudes between two powerful women who were not sharing the same little bald orc who was lying on the shore carefree and thought he was asleep. Instead of fighting, however, Layla bowed her head and said that she knew she was protecting the forest, but they were not her enemies. These were not just words, but a strong elven spell, which like a strong wind began to push the nymph away from the shore. No matter how upset she was that her prey had been taken from her, she still had to retreat back into the depths. Layla made it through and saved the little bald idiot. Probably not the last time. But Gul didn't get off as easy as it might seem at first glance. Too much water had gotten into his lungs and he stopped breathing. Layla rushed to his aid. She helped him cough up the water by pressing on his chest. And with her help, Gul finally woke up. Layla immediately asked if he was okay. But Gul was actually still floating in his dreams and was sure he was in heaven. Of course, the harsh reality and the pain from the deep wounds quickly made him feel better and brought him to his senses. Layla advised him to lie down and stay still while she treated his wounds. She immediately began, reciting her healing spell. All the wounds that Gul had, she transferred to a small tree she had plucked nearby. Soon, Gul was as good as new, safe and sound, with his green bald head as shiny as ever. Seeing his overly cheerful mood, Layla asked if he realized he had narrowly escaped death. One look at Gul was enough to realize that he didn't. Still, he thanked her for her help, and told her how he had seen her glowing earlier. She was lit like white flames, but ain't burnin'. Suddenly, Gul smelled burnt meat, and was horrified to realize that his meatballs were burned completely. Layla wasn't surprised. The kid had almost died, but all he was thinking about was food. So, while Gul tried to rescue the remains of his dinner, Layla approached Ran, and praised him for his smart move, for it was very wise of him to tie the string to Gul. Ran didn't see anything ingenious about it. He just learned from experience that the little bastard tended to disappear when he wasn't being looked at. That was why he had to put him on a leash. Eventually, Gul did manage to save a few meatballs, and he rushed to share them with Layla, which immediately made Ran sick. And while they were enjoying their meal, Ran ended up burping into the lake. Gul couldn't restrain himself and claimed that he was polluting the forest, and for that the nymphs would soon hunt him down. Now Ran was in desperate need of rest, and even the forest clearing was now suitable for that. New day, new prey. The poor winged deer ran with all his legs, and Gul was chasing him at his heels. He might have caught him if it hadn't been for a treacherous root, because of which Gul stumbled and flew even faster than the surprised deer. Gul's flight wasn't long. Ran still had him on a leash. He wasn't going to let him go anywhere. Layla couldn't help but notice that Ran was now treating Gul like a dog. Eventually, Ran took pity on him and let him go, and soon the deer was chopped up and put on skewers. Everything was done according to Auntie Garam's recipe. The unrivaled masterpiece called the Bhubiz-style kebab was almost ready. All that was needed was to add some seasoning, and once the kebab started heating up, the smell was simply divine. While Gul was cooking, Layla asked Ran how he was doing up there. He was at the top of the tree, scouting for miles around with his keen eyes. They had only a few more miles to go, and they should be able to reach the ever-moving forest. Meanwhile, the smell of roasting meat drew a guest to their camp. Ran sensed his approach immediately. As soon as the spy emerged from the bushes, he was immediately met by Layla's sharp dagger. The poor man immediately climbed out of the bushes and began begging for mercy and to wait, for he was just an unarmed traveling merchant. Layla, of course, didn't really believe him, and one look at her was enough to realize that he wasn't going to live. The traveling merchant immediately started begging for mercy and making excuses that he was lured here by the sweet smell of delicious meat. As soon as Gul heard this, he immediately asked Layla to let him meet this guy. After all, anyone attracted by the smell of meat is a brother to him. Gul wasn't going to deny anyone a meal. Well, since Gul was okay with it, Layla let the merchant into their camp. There was no limit to his happiness. The traveling merchant just couldn't stop praising how phenomenal this meat was, especially after not eating normally for a week. Gul, with a smug face, accepted all the praise and didn't fail to remind him that it was all prepared by the first assistant of Bork's restaurant in Bhubiz. By Gul himself, the most handsome orc. The traveling merchant liked the name of Gul's village, and he introduced himself as Damo. And so it was that they met. Gul was simply delighted by the trader's large backpack, which sold a wide variety of goods. Ran was interested in more practical things. Considering that he was a traveling merchant, he wanted to find out some information from him. Ran was especially curious if there were any villages on the way to the ever-moving forest where they were headed. The merchant immediately saw this as an opportunity, and offered Ran a look at a fantastic original leather dagger sheath. He insisted that it was a unique offer that could not be missed. Gul, meanwhile, was trying to create a Lomi 2.0, also offering this bird some meat. Ran realized that until he bought something from the merchant, he wouldn't say anything, so he grudgingly agreed to buy in exchange for information. And for only 2 silver coins, he got a new sheath. Then Damo told him that a few miles from here to the southeast, they would come across a spiral rock. Then they would only have to go straight for a bit, and they would come across a village called Okakeo. But Damo also warned them that he had heard that the monsters out there are becoming a little bit unorthodox. Our adventurers promised him they'd take note. Gul, meanwhile, was trying to take a bite out of the poor bird. Before saying goodbye, Damo decided to give Gul a special gift. A blue firework in the shape of a dragon, which Gul was of course delighted with. Damo colorfully told him that these fireworks are called Ice Dragon, and instead of sparks of fire it'll burst out like a blizzard. It will surely feel as if it's winter in the middle of a piping hot desert. Gul was thrilled. Damo assured Gul that it was an ultra-mega special item, but it doesn't compare to the food Gul provided him. Finally, Damo said goodbye to everyone and set off, but there was something about him that didn't seem right, and from the looks of it, he only wanted to appear to be a traveling merchant. That was his cover. In reality, he was one of Madame Roselle's spies, and today he had learned many interesting things.